Going on? Yeah, I want you down to meeting. Cool, thank you. Why don't you shoot me an email so I don't forget? What's up? Shoot me an email so I don't forget. Okay. All right. Good luck at the interview. How are you? Good. I like that jacket you got. Very good. going on? I like that shirt. Very cool. All right, it's 2 o'clock, so let's get started. Let's go ahead and begin class because it's 2 o'clock. All right, so today's chapter 13, so we'll talk about teams today. I also want to spend some time talking about group papers at some point. Four teams submitted feedback or submitted the papers for feedback. Pretty good start. And I think the rest of y'all can benefit from the things that I gave them feedback on. They got a lot of detailed feedback, so it was really beneficial. I hope for them to submit that for feedback early. But still, I want to talk as a group and look at some common mistakes to avoid. So I think we'll save that for the end of the lecture today. Let's go ahead and start with some good things. A lot of good things. We haven't done this in a while. So Rubaisha, she's not here yet. We'll ask her where she's going when she gets here. Mike got a pet. We'll ask him what he got when he gets here. Syed, you started a new radio show. What is it? It's like a podcast or? Nice. That's cool. And it's your show, like you control this thing? Nice. Very cool. What channel is this on? Oh, nice. All right, very cool. Good luck with that. All right, who's there? I don't think I've seen him yet. He's got an interview, so we'll wish him luck. Alex also has an interview later today, so we'll wish him luck as well. All right, Eric passed an exam, so congrats to Eric. Nice job. I saw Sydney sporting her gear. She went and saw Grupo Frontera, which have y'all heard of that group before? They're a pretty big deal. All right, I'm very ignorant in pop culture, so she got to meet them. That's pretty cool. Khadijah is not here yet. She did well on the LSAT. Who's going into law here? I didn't realize there were many of y'all doing that. She is apparently, and she's off to a good start. So congrats to her. Isaiah is a flag football champ, so congrats to him. Very cool. What position do you play? Oh, nice. Very cool. You guys get a ring? All right. All right, and then Norelli, you have a pinata business? Nice. Nice. Very cool. Well, congrats. That sounds awesome. All right. A lot of cool stuff this week. I wanted to share some old selfies. Got two good ones here. They've been kind of slacking lately, but I think these are two pretty good ones. So Jania and Rubaisha on your left, and Taha and Rashid on the right. Very cool. All right. Some of y'all keep taking pictures of me to submit for this selfie. That's not required. You could do that if you want, but that is not required. All right, so let's look at chapter 13, learning objectives. We're talking about teams today. So we'll differentiate teams from groups. We'll talk about how groups and teams develop and how we can manage groups and teams effectively, how to deal with conflict, and then talk about developing our career readiness in terms of teamwork and collaboration. As always, there's a lot of personal life lessons you can take out of this. We're going to talk about teams in the organization context, but this might be relevant if you're stressed out with your teamwork for your upcoming group project. You might be able to use some strategies from this chapter. All right, so first up, let's differentiate groups versus teams, also formal versus informal, and different types of teams. So first question for y'all, in your own words, how would you differentiate groups and teams? Cyrus?
Groups usually don't work together to achieve a common goal. It's the main purpose of teams.
Yeah, that's actually like pretty perfectly said. I'm guessing you read the chapter in advance?
Yeah.
All right, very good, Cyrus. That's a good textbook definition. So the main difference is that teams work together. There's a term we'll learn for that called interdependence. Teams rely on each other to get work done, whereas if you're in a group, you don't necessarily rely on others to be successful. formally stated. A group is a collection of people. They work independently, and a team is the same collection of people, but they have a shared purpose. So organizations, broadly speaking, are teams if they have a common purpose. Whatever the mission statement is for the organization is what makes their purpose shared. All right, a term that you'll have to know for the final exam, this might be one to write down, is interdependence. Teams are interdependent. That means they rely on each other to get work done. What does that mean for your group projects? How are you interdependent, Eric? Yeah. Yeah, like if one person doesn't fill their role, then the group's going to suffer. And it seems like every group so far has said, like, you're going to do the intro, you're going to do the strengths, you're going to do the weaknesses. That's pretty common division of labor for the group projects. And in that aspect, you're interdependent of everyone doing their job. Okay. All right, so let's talk about formal versus informal teams. So formal teams or groups, rather, we'll use the term group here. Formal groups are assembled to accomplish a specific goal. If they're informal, they don't have a specific goal necessarily. They just kind of form organically. And in most situations, this is just a social network or a group of friends. As management, we need to understand that informal groups can undermine formal groups. How do you think that might work? How could like a clique or a group of friends undermine business goals? Krish? Yeah, that's a really good example. They're friends. They might be, I don't know, goofing off or playing around, not taking their work seriously, and that can undermine the organization's goals. If we use them effectively, they can also advance org goals. I got my haircut yesterday and I was sitting down in the barbershop and I realized everyone in the barbershop's like very laid back. When they close the shop, they get drinks together in the shop. They like drink in the shop. They do things that a lot of like usual managers would say, that's bad. You shouldn't be drinking in the shop after hours. But they're all really tight knit. When they come in, as soon as you see one of them walk in, they fist bump every one of the other barbers as they walk by. They take turns sweeping the floor. They're like really tight knit, and you can tell that helps them run the shop better. So in that situation, sometimes informal groups can advance the org goals if they're very cohesive. All right, let's talk about, sorry, click the slide, to teams. To teams, there's a lot of labels we can use. They're generally classified by their purpose, their duration, and their level of commitment. I'll say the labels aren't super important, but we're going to see how they function differently and the different teams we can see in organization. Most common is our work team. Work teams are typically permanent and they require the full commitment of the teammates. When we think about teams, work teams are kind of the default method here. Project teams are assembled for specific tasks. And a lot of times, if you're on a project team, you're also doing your main role outside of that. So you have your job, like let's say you work at a restaurant, you're a server. Your main job is to serve tables, but then you get assembled for a project team. And the project team is to revamp the menu. So you're going to work maybe off hours with a small team to revamp the menu in addition to your primary task. All right, those are not permanent. Relative to work teams, project teams are not permanent usually. Last up here, we have cross-functional teams. That's where members from different areas of the organization come together to work on usually a project, but sometimes they're also a permanent work team. If you think about hospitals, they're one of the best examples of cross-functional teams, because if you look inside the ER, or maybe an operating room, there's a surgeon, there is a team of nurses. That's like a big team they have different functions and they all contribute to the team's goals there. All right. Last two types are more like descriptors. They're not really types of teams. They're descriptors of other teams. Self-managed, for example, you could be a work team or a project team, and you could be self-managed. Basically, it just means that you're calling the shots for yourself. You don't necessarily have an external leader to answer to, but you can develop your own goals and course of actions. And then virtual teams have become much more popular lately because it just means you're working virtually. So maybe you meet over Zoom. Probably a lot of your group projects for this class you do most of your work virtually. So a couple questions here. First question is, why do you think self-managed teams might be more motivating for the team members? Eric? Yes, it's probably more efficient because they know what they need to do. Sometimes the boss doesn't, but the team does. That's definitely true. Any other thoughts on that? Think about it this way. Why would it be more motivating to run your team as a team versus answer to your boss? Or why would it be less motivating to only be able to do what the leader says to do? Connor? Yes, that's exactly right. So you said we tend to resist when people give us orders. That's a really good example of what we learned last class. Remember, we can motivate people if we give them autonomy and responsibility. Whereas if we take those away and we micromanage people, it's way less motivating. So that's one of the huge benefits of self-managed teams. Let's talk about virtual teams. The pro is pretty easy. We can work wherever we are at whatever hour from our home office, and that's pretty convenient. But what's the con to having a virtual team? Why could that be less effective relative to an in-person team? Connor? Yes. There's a lot of research that says if teams are not in person, if they're only virtual, then they lose a lot of cohesion just from interacting face to face. There's also a lot of research that shows at the start of meetings, you know how a lot of meetings start with like 5 minutes of small talk, and sometimes you're like, come on, let's get this meeting over with. So a lot of people don't like that, but the research shows that doing the small talk and the interacting is really good for building social ties within the group, and the group's more effective if they have the chance to interact socially. And you lose that if you're a virtual team. All right. Very good. Very good. There's the answers. All right, let's talk about team development. There's a very famous model, Tuckman's 5-stage model, that defines the lifespan of a team. It's very interesting to look at. Have you all heard of this before? Forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning. It's very popular. It's popular because it all rhymes. Except if English is your first language, you know that adjourning, it's not pronounced that way. It's pronounced adjourning, but it has to fit the rhyme scheme. So these all rhyme. These are the stages of a team. First, they form. They get together and they ask, what are we doing here? What's our purpose? Then a lot of times teams storm, where there's conflict when we figure out who's going to step up and take lead of this team. We have a lot of ideas that are clashing before the team starts to settle into their norms. Norming is the third stage where we figure out what are our roles, how are we going to work as a team, what's our direction. After they're norming, then they can start to finally perform, do the job, and then they adjourn. They disassemble and move on to the next task. I want to show y'all a good demonstration from Lord of the Rings. Any Lord of the Rings fans out there? Yeah, very good movie series. So we'll watch like a 3-minute clip that demonstrates the process here. Let's see. All right, let's see if this works. 5-minute clip. All right, settle in. Those are our 5 stages. All right, so we have to think about if we are a manager, we're leading a team through these 5 stages. There are certain points where the team is most likely to fail. And most obviously, that's our storming stage. But really, at all 5 stages, we can provide the team some help as a manager to help them not fail, to stay together as a team, but also to maximize the processes that happen in each stage. So, for example, in our first stage of forming, if I'm the leader, I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to socialize to the group before they start to engage in task work. So I wouldn't just say, all right, the 4 of y'all get together and here's your project, go. I would say, all right, take some time to get to know each other, figure out how you're going to work together, and then I'll give them a project. During the storming stage, make sure that there is a sharing of ideas that is constructive rather than offensive and destructive. Make sure they can norm properly, emphasize unity and a shared goal. The one thing that usually helps teams overcome adversity is to remind them of the fact that they need each other to be successful, and they have some shared goal or some shared value. Make sure they have empowerment for task work, give them autonomy and responsibility and meaningfulness. And then as they adjourn and prepare for the next task, make sure they reflect on what they've learned so they can apply it to the next go about. All right. Those are the 5 stages. The research suggests that there's not these like 5 linear stages that happen one after another. But in fact, there's this thing called punctuated equilibrium. It's not underlined, so I don't think it's on the final exam. Don't stress about that. But what you need to know is that there's typically something that causes teams to go from stage to stage. And it's usually some kind of unexpected change. So sometimes the team is surprised by something that shakes things up. Then they have to relook at how they're doing things and sometimes adopt a different approach as a team. It tends to look like this. This is punctuated equilibrium, where they're in this state of equilibrium, which means things are going great, everything's smooth. Then something changes, something unexpected that causes the team to shift how they function. And then after they adapt to that, they go back to equilibrium for a little bit. And then after a while, something else changes things, and then they have to find a new equilibrium. So that tends to be how teams work. All right, let's talk about building effective teams. A few things that are really important: collaboration, trust, goals, accountability. So let's talk about these. First up, so with collaboration and trust, these are very important for teams to be successful. Teams, like we said, are interdependent. They rely on each other. And if they're not able to collaborate effectively, then the team's not going to be, well, they won't be able to help each other out very effectively. So a couple things here. To be effective at collaboration, teams have to be able to share info and coordinate efforts. If you ever watch like a sports team that looks very disorganized on the field, they're not in sync and they tend to perform really poorly. That's a result of they're not coordinating, they're not talking to each other, and their collaboration in general is poor. If you're managing teams, you should make sure that rewards encourage collaboration. How do you think we can encourage collaboration with rewards? What kind of reward would we give? Any thoughts on that? Eric? Nice. Is that like an individual award? Yeah, that's definitely a good way to motivate people. What would be even better is if we said, as a group, we all have to meet this goal, and then we can all spin the wheel and get the reward. It's like, all right, if as a team, if we are able to have an average turnover of 45 minutes, let's say we want to get tables in and out quickly. We say, all right, our goal tonight is 45-minute turnover for these tables. If we achieve that as a group, then all of us, we can spin the wheel and maybe we'll win like, I don't know, what's a good reward? we'll go out to the bar after and I'll buy the first round, something like that. Basically, something that encourages them to work together as a team is going to be beneficial for this. If you're on a team, you should practice empathy and listening skills. Probably the one that's lacking the most. Well, both of these tend to be lacking in a lot of people. Be empathetic, care about people and their well-being, but also develop listening skills, because a lot of times when teams fight, they're not listening to each other. And they think like, well, my point of view is better. And the other person says, well, no, my point of view is better. And sometimes they're arguing the same thing, but stating it differently. And they're not listening to each other. So it'll also help you understand. If you are saying different things, you can understand better if you listen to somebody. Okay. Trust. The book talks about a trust triangle. That sounds kind of corny, but it shows us that there's 3 things that are required for building trust. If you want people to trust you, demonstrate authenticity, logic, and empathy. If you're authentic, people pick up on that. If you don't think of someone who's like really fake in your life, you think like, oh, that person's kind of, I know he's fake or she's fake. People pick up on that, and they're not going to trust you if they don't think you're authentic. Use logic. If you want to argue your point and get people to believe you and follow you, you should be logical. And then demonstrate empathy. That one is restated because it's so important. If people think you care about them, then they will trust you to do the right thing. All right. The collaboration and trust are very important. If we have those 2 things, our team could function well, but we also need to give our team SMART goals. And SMART goals for teams are the same as SMART goals for individuals. So remember, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, timely. If I'm leading a team, I'm going to give them SMART goals. Okay. All right. In addition to SMART goals, we can motivate teams with mutual accountability and interdependence. So mutual accountability might be achieved by making them a self-managed team. Sometimes I don't have to say they're totally self-managed. I might say, like, all right, y'all, for this project, I want you to develop your own course of action, and then give it to me as your leader. I'll take a look at it, make sure everything's good. But I want to give them some autonomy in the process. That'll help them be motivated to buy into it. If they are mutually accountable, they'll also like hold each other responsible for seeing that through. Since you guys have a group grade that's shared, you are mutually accountable, because if one of you slacks off, you're going to tank the other person's grade. All right. And then interdependence, we already defined before. All right, let's look at building effective teams. All right, so when we build teams, what we want to do is build human capital. Do you remember that term? So human capital includes our KSAs, knowledge, skills, abilities, anything that allows us to contribute to the success of performance. In the team context, we have to figure out, like, how do we make sure that we have the right combination of skills and attitudes and experience? So for a cross-functional team, I might want some diversity in composition. Like if I'm in the operating room, I don't want to have all surgeons in the operating room. I want to have some surgeons, or usually 1 or 2 surgeons, and then a couple nurses, and then some other people to fulfill the different roles. Okay, so that's something we think about as we compose the team. Something else we tend to not think about is personalities. Well, maybe naturally we think of that when we're forming teams in school. We want to work with people that are like us. That makes it easier for us to work with them. Okay. All right. Some questions we can ask as we're assembling teams. Do we have the necessary skills? That's probably the first thing that comes to mind. Do we have the people who can get the job done? Do we have complementary personalities? And do we have diversity? I have a couple questions here. Why do you think, or how could diversity benefit team performance? And this could be like racial diversity, ideological diversity, diversity and experience. Carissa? Yeah, that's exactly right. So if we have more diversity, that tends to give us more perspectives. That helps us be innovative. We can find new ways to do things better. So that's great. When do you think a lack of diversity could be a good thing? Could it ever? Carissa? So what was the first thing you said? Yeah, you're definitely right. Everyone's on the same page. That tends to be most beneficial for really simple tasks. It's like, all right, guys, I need y'all to do something that's very simple, no thought required. In those situations, the research shows that less diversity is good because there's less like conflicting perspectives. It's a more homogenous team. They like, because they're all similar, they think and act alike. In general, though, especially in today's world, we have more complicated tasks for teams, so diversity tends to be beneficial. All right. One last thing I'll say about personalities. We like to have similar personalities, but think of a situation where we have a bunch of agreeable teammates. Everyone's super agreeable. That can mean that the team isn't very productive because they don't like challenge each other's ideas. Just something to think about. All right, keep going here. We'll talk about roles, norms, effective team processes. Let's start with the roles first. Every teammate on a team serves a role. There's a long list. Here's a sneak peek. We'll come back to this, but there's a long list of roles you can fill. You're going to take a self-assessment. They'll tell you, I think that's the one we're doing today. It says like, you tend to be this role. They can be grouped into two categories. You either tend to focus on task or maintenance roles. And if you're task focused, it's like, do you want to get things done and contribute to performance for the group? And if you're maintenance focused, then you tend to be more concerned about maintaining positive relationships, like being a cheerleader, boosting spirits, trying to minimize conflict. Both are very important to effective teams. If your team only focuses on tasks, that can lead to interpersonal conflict. And if you have somebody with a maintenance role, they can help you smooth out that conflict and continue to function as a team. So teams need both. And we tend to, as individuals, we tend to have a personal predisposition. Like we prefer to serve as one role versus the other. This is the long list. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because you'll get back from your self-assessment, I think, and it's going to tell you which one of these you are. But just as a couple examples here, there's a lot of task roles that we might fill. Maybe we're the initiator, we're like the idea person. Maybe we're the elaborator. We don't have ideas, but we can really bounce off ideas and make them better. Maybe we're the evaluator. We make sure things look good before it gets submitted. The recorder, someone who takes notes. If you're a maintenance person, you might be a harmonizer, trying to resolve conflict, or a follower, somebody who like follows orders well and gets things done. So, all right, just I know a lot of y'all probably have done the self-assessment already, but how many of y'all tend to think of yourself as a task-focused person? All right, what about relations or maintenance-focused? Who thinks they're maintenance-focused? All right, that's good to know about yourself. It's also good to be honest with your team or open with your teams when you start out, so we know who's going to be filling what role. All right, we're going to come back to that at the end of class. We'll talk about building effective teams some more. This is probably one of the most important parts of teamwork, and that is team norms. Norms are similar to culture. So organizations have culture that says, this is how we do things around here. Teams have norms that say the same thing. They are unwritten rules. Almost always they're unwritten rules about how teamwork gets done, how we support each other. What do we do if somebody neglects their role? Like, do we punish them? Do we ostracize them? Those are all part of our norms. They're super important to team success. They help the team survive. They clarify expectations. They help people avoid embarrassing situations. If a team norm, like let's say you're in a group meeting and you're the newbie, and the team always likes to end meetings right on time. They don't like extra discussion. And as a newbie, you speak up at the end. You're like, wait, I got another question. Can we stay a little longer and chat? And everyone's like, oh gosh, just be quiet. Like you would be embarrassing yourself because you don't know the norms of the team in that situation. Last, norms help to emphasize shared values and identity. The reason teams and more broadly shared identity is so important to people is that having like a shared identity gives us some comfort. Humans tend to want to avoid uncertainty. They want to know that they're doing the right thing. And being in a team with strong norms helps you feel comfortable because you know what's expected. You know if you're doing the right thing. You know if you're doing the wrong thing. So norms are really important for that. Okay. Look at team charters, team reflexivity, and team voice. So team charters are an explicit agreement. Typically, a team will sit down at the start of their team life cycle and they'll actually write out like, here's how we're going to work together as a team. This is our agreement that we're going to always meet on Thursdays. We're going to prefer to communicate by GroupMe. We're going to always get our work done on time. And if we don't, here's what's going to be the group consequence. So charters are super important. If we had learned this like week one when we started our teams, I would have y'all do this because it's very effective for helping you work together better. Team reflexivity. This is reflecting on goals and performance as a team. So looking back on our past performance and seeing like if we were successful, what made us successful? And if we were not successful, what was the purpose or what was the cause for us not being successful? As with most things, the best way to improve is to reflect back on prior performance. Do you remember that midterm extra credit question? It's like, in general, what's the best way to improve yourself? And it's always to reflect on prior performance. All right, then last up here is team voice. So being able to speak up if you have concerns, opinions, or new ideas. Teams that allow for voice tend to be better. Have you ever been in a team when there's one leader and they don't let new ideas be presented? They're like, no, this is how we're doing it, guys. If you're in a situation with very little voice, that tends to hamper team performance. How do y'all think if we're a group leader, how can we encourage voice? Norelli? Yeah, just opening the floor. That's a really good idea. Okay. Any other thoughts? All right, I like that one. So we can open the floor to people. Something else we can do that we've discussed before is we can facilitate psychological safety. So making sure that people feel safe to speak up by opening the floor, like Norelli suggested, that helps. But what also helps is when people suggest ideas, don't say that they're dumb ideas or laugh at people for bringing things up. All right, so voice is a good thing. Okay. Last topic here is conflict. So we'll talk about managing conflict. This is inevitable with teams. We'll talk about how conflict occurs, how could it be good and bad, the types of conflict, how to make conflict an effective or constructive type. So let's dive in. Okay, so conflict is essentially a disagreement. It is a perfectly normal state of affairs. So one of the takeaways here is that conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. If you're working in a team, it's necessary. If we think about our 5 stages, the second one, I think it's the second one, is storming. So teams at some point have to storm to figure out what they're going to be as a team. It could be functional, which is good, or dysfunctional, which is bad. We tend to think of dysfunctional conflict. My question is, how could it be good? What does functional conflict look like? Any ideas? Eric? Yeah. So if we share different ideas and we listen to them and we think about them, maybe we integrate them, that sort of conflict can be really good. Remember like the dialectic method and devil's advocate, those are ways that we could have conflict created on purpose to benefit the team. I guess that's a good example. One of the key things that Eric mentioned is like having being receptive and respectful for different opinions. All right. Which will help you answer one of the final exam questions. How much conflict is good? If you have too little conflict, that's bad. And if you have too much conflict, that's also bad. We tend to think of too much being bad, obviously. We tend to forget that if you have too little conflict, just as if you had too little stress, that's bad. So here, they labeled it too little conflict. This is inactivity. Why do you think too little conflict results in inactivity? Why do we need some conflict? Appreciate you, Eric. Maybe some asides, Eric? Mike? Yeah. That's boring. That's true. Boredom is one aspect. There's something probably even more important. Really? Yeah, we just keep doing what we've been doing. No one's ever going to challenge the status quo, and we don't get better. That's a result of having too little conflict. So the final exam question might say, true or false? Teams work best under little to no conflict. And you would think that's true. Yeah, little conflict is great. It's false. So false. Teams do not work best under little to no conflict. They need some level of conflict. All right. Let's talk about the types of conflict here. Personal, envy, intergroup, and cross-cultural. Personality conflicts. If we have different personalities, so remember the big five? I might be super introverted and you might be super extroverted. I think you're annoying and you think I'm quiet and weird. So that might make it hard for us to work together. Envy-based conflicts, maybe I'm jealous of something that you have. Intergroup conflicts, this is a very broad category. Groups have a hard time working together. If teams are super, if they identify with their team really strongly, like, yeah, we're this team, we're great at this. It's hard to work with other teams. And cross-cultural conflict, essentially, we have different cultures. That makes it hard for us to work together. All right. Question. Regardless of the type of conflict, because that's kind of irrelevant, it is a conflict exists, and we have to overcome it. So if we're experiencing team conflict, how can we help our team overcome it? Any thoughts here? There are a lot of potential answers here. Mike? Yeah, talk to them. Try to mediate the situation. Okay, yeah. Yeah, kind of like serve as a counselor. I like that. Any other ideas? Let's get one more good one. Krish. Okay, so let them sit down and talk to each other, listen to each other and see what their perspective is. Yeah, okay, I like that too. Both those are really good options. The one thing that we want to communicate, if we're either mediating or just listening to them hash it out, at the end, we should remind them of their shared goals. That's almost always the most effective way to help the team get back on the same page, is to say like, all right, guys, I know y'all think this. I know you think that they're being D-holes here, but like y'all have the same goal, work together because you're on the same team. Y'all see the signs around Chicago that says, we're all on this together. That's like the message that that's sending, is that we're all on the same team here. So let's not be D-holes to each other. All right. Remind them of shared purpose and values. Very good. All right. Next up, how can we stimulate constructive conflict? A couple ways we can spur competition among employees. One, probably the biggest takeaways of team reward research, like how do we reward teams, is that we want to have an equal balance of team-based collective rewards, and individual rewards. We want to have something that motivates people to work hard for themselves, like a bonus or a salary, but at the same time, we want to make sure that they see some reason to work together as a team. It's like when we talked about Eric's Restaurant, as a team, if we do this, then we all get a benefit. To try to balance that, bring in outsiders for new perspectives. So hiring someone from, or bringing in someone from outside the team can help shake things up. And then used programmed conflict. So devil's advocate, that's what we're most familiar with. And remember the dialectic method, that's basically what the US court system is, where we build a case for both sides, we present it, and then we decide which was the most logical side. All right. Let's see. Let's look at the different approaches to dealing with disagreement. The research suggests we each have our own method for dealing with disagreements. We tend to either integrate both perspectives to resolve disagreements. We oblige people, which means we just give in to whatever they want. We compromise our own desires. We can dominate. We can say, it's my way or their highway. Or we can avoid the situation by saying, like, let's just not talk about this because it's uncomfortable. In the middle here is compromising, where we have give and take from both sides. So we all tend to have our own preference. It's also situation dependent, but generally speaking, if we have a high concern for others and a high concern for self, that means I care about other people's well-being, I care about my well-being, then I tend to try to integrate. So I want to get the best ideas from both. Let's have an integrative solution to this problem. Whereas if I care very little about my own concerns, let's look at this one. If I care a little about myself and I care more about other people, then I just give in to whatever people, whatever they want. Like I'm a yes man or a yes woman. All right, the question here is, which of these styles do you think is the best? What's the best method usually for resolving conflict? Amari? Obliging? Why do you say that? Okay. Yeah, so yeah, it's nice to be like, all right, I'm gonna let you get the final say here. I'll oblige. Do whatever you want. What if it's something you really care about? Connor? Yeah, that's a good answer. Yes, that's a good answer. This is one of those, it depends again. Amari's answer is really good in situations where maybe we don't really care about it. Like, let's say it's, where are we going to go for dinner? Let's say my wife is like, I really want to go get Mexican food and I really don't care. Then I'm not going to have a fight over it because I'll just oblige her in this situation. When do y'all think avoiding could be best? When could it be good to avoid conflict? Do you have a thought, Amari? That's if you said if you have like total authority. Okay. Mike? Yeah, I like that approach. Sometimes we avoid it, maybe just temporarily. If we see that things are getting heated, it's like, all right, let's take a step back. Let's come back to this tomorrow. One situation I was thinking of is just if it doesn't matter, if whatever you're arguing about is irrelevant, then maybe stop arguing about it and just avoid the conflict altogether. So all these approaches can work well. We tend to have one that we prefer. What's good is if you're self-aware, you recognize like, oh, I'm an avoider because I don't like it when there's tense situations. And if that's your tendency, sometimes you got to put yourself out there and stick up for what you believe in. One interesting takeaway is that compromising is not always the best. People tend to think like, oh, we can compromise, like give and take. The downside of compromising is that everybody loses something they want. If something's really important to both sides and we can integrate, that tends to be the best. The hard part is integrating and making everyone happy. To say like, all right, we're going to take some of the things you want, some of the things you want, and let's integrate and see if we can make everyone happy. That's really hard to do well. All right. These are our career readiness competencies. A lot of these we've already talked about, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. You should work on your teamwork skills and your collaboration and your social intelligence. The one thing I'll say about these is that you can develop these if you just put yourself out there. It's like join intramural teams, get on Zay's football team, you can win a championship. Go join student orgs because it'll help you practice the skills you need to be successful in teams. This is probably one of the most important things to having a successful career is being a good team player. Be open to change, have emotional intelligence, and work on your communication skills. Sound good? All right. I think what I want to do this self-assessment. I want to make sure we get to our group paper stuff because there's a lot of things I want y'all to do well on this paper. Let me switch presentations for just a second. And I would really encourage you to pay attention to this part, even if you didn't think the lecture was super interesting. There are a lot of really simple things you can do in your group papers to score well. There's a lot of really simple mistakes you can make to score very poorly. So I will benefit from the 4 papers that submitted theirs early for feedback. I want to talk about good things to do with the intro, with the SWOT analysis, and with the outro, but I want to start with the intro first. This is actually an example from, I think, group 5, Uber. This is a really good introduction, so I wanted to share this as an example for y'all. So they say, by the way, this is like the second half of their intro. The history came first, and then this is their mission, vision, and value statements. So they said, Uber's mission statement is transportation as reliable as running water, everywhere for everyone. What I like about this is that they go on to explain, what does this say about Uber? So they say, this means that the company's objective is to make transportation as dependable and accessible as possible. They use their mission to make sure that they're providing services of good quality, and they're coming up with solutions to transportation that are simple and convenient to use. If you look at their values are building globally, live locally, customer obsessed, celebrate differences. Uber's core values convey, that's a good word, it conveys that its customers are the most important people. All of its differences make it proud, it obeys every rule, it behaves like an owner, and it places a high value on the suggestions of a hierarchy. So what I like about this is that they not only do they provide the mission, vision, and values, but they say, what does it mean about Uber as a company? The only thing I might add to this, might consolidate this, it's okay if you just say, sentence 1, here's their mission statement. Sentence 2, here's their vision. Sentence 3, here are their values. And then you spend like 2 sentences summarizing, what does this say about Uber? I like this format a lot, but if you have to trim down, which this group might have to trim down a bit, that's how you can maybe trim this section down. All right, some pointers about the introduction. The key takeaway is that the history and the overview in general, this introduction, tells us how the company came to be and what the company stands for. You have to do those things to get 100% on the introduction section. Let me actually also show you this. This is the rubric that I provided on like the first or second week of class. I've highlighted some of the things that I think are going to be things we tend to forget. So if you're doing the intro section, you should revisit this page and look at what does it take to get 100% for this section. So are you concise? Do you inform the audience of how the company came to be? And you provide insights about how this represents what the company stands for. And I think Uber did a really good job of that. So nice job to them. All right, let's go back to this. The SWOT analysis. This is, I made this one up myself. Is anyone doing Apple? I think one team is, right? Good. Well, this is fictional anyways. This is what I want a SWOT analysis to look like. This is a weakness, and this is just one example. Remember that in the weakness section, you have to have 3 weaknesses. For this one, I said one of Apple's weaknesses is that they're poor performance in sustainability. So I stated it first, then I described what is sustainability. Sustainability involves minimizing negative impacts, and it's a core component in demonstrating corporate social responsibility. And then I cited the book. Remember that for one example in each section, so like for one threat, for one weakness, for one opportunity, you have to cite something from the book and apply it. And by the way, I posted this online, so I'll show you that in just a sec. So I defined sustainability. Then I said, as an example of Apple's poor sustainability, they set the Amazon rainforest on fire. And then I cited some news article. So it's a very clear example of how they are bad at that. You can't just say, oh, they're bad at technology. They're bad at customer service. You have to give an example, then cite the example. Next, I say, how does this impact their competitive advantage? Well, sustainability and CSR are increasingly important for businesses because research suggests that younger generations prefer businesses that have a positive global impact. That's also something we learned in class, so I can cite the book. And by the way, this is how we cite the book. Kinnicky and Swanet, 2022, in parentheses. And then last, I'm going to give them some suggestions. So Apple can increase their sustainability by engaging in corporate governance, which is defined as a system of rules, practices, and processes governing a company so the interests of corporate owners are protected. This comes also straight from the book. So see how I applied 3 concepts from the book and I cited it? If you do this, I'm going to love your paper. You're going to probably get extra credit. If every section does this, that's great. You know what else is great about this is if I'm pitching this to an organization, they want to know specific examples of why you think that's a weakness for them. So like, all right, Apple, this is a weakness. I know it's a weakness because you set fire to a forest. That's bad. People don't like that. Younger generations prefer you to be sustainable. And they want to know some actionable steps based on research. So I can tell them research suggests that if you engage in corporate social responsibility, you're going to develop a more competitive advantage because younger generations will appreciate that. Okay. All right. I broke this down on this next slide here. By the way, this is what it looks like on the page. So it's not even half a page what I just wrote. Remember the weakness section is like 2 pages. And I only need 2 more examples. So I'm not going to fill 2 pages, but I don't care about that. In fact, if y'all write less, if you gave me a good 7-page paper, I'd be very happy. What we're seeing is that you have a hard time filling 10 pages without going over because we tend to put filler in our writing. So eliminate the filler. Follow this format here. If you're writing a good weakness, sentence 1, give me an intro. So a weakness is X, Y, Z. Sentence 2, define what you're saying the weakness is. Sentence 3, provide an example of how they've demonstrated that weakness. Sentence 4, apply it. So this affects their competitive advantage for this reason. And then sentence 5, give them some recommendation for overcoming that. So it's 5 sentences. It's actually a very short amount of text. But it's very targeted. It's very concise. All right. Don't try to write pretty. Be succinct, stick to the point. Remember, you have to have 3 weaknesses and only one of them has to have some book application. So after this one weakness, you can write 2 more weaknesses, but you do not have to apply something from the book. Does that make sense? All right. I think the one thing I want to make sure we're really clear about, are we clear about the SWOT section? So we have to have 1 strength that applies to the book out of 3, 1 weakness out of 3 that applies. If you have questions on this, let me know. Submit it early because if you don't have this, let's go back to the rubric here. If you don't have some application of book material, like that's the minimum you need for 70%. At least one of them applies to the book. So if you're not having that, that's going to really tank your grade for that section. If you're not sure about, is this a good application of book material, you can let me know. I'll give you feedback even still before the deadline. All right, so that's the SWOT. Conclusion. I think Jawad wrote this, right? This is a good conclusion. This is only his last paragraph. His conclusion was a little over a page. And the first paragraph is a summary. And this is the final point here. So in conclusion, Tesla has made considerable progress. They've established themselves as a pioneer. However, they need to improve affordability, solve limitations, adopt AI capabilities. The key message, it's a really, really good phrase here. The key message is quite clear. In order to lead, they need to keep fostering innovation, attending consumer needs, and ensuring ethical leadership. So what I like about this is that it has a clear takeaway. If you look at the rubric, to get 100%, you have to have a clear takeaway message for the audience. And think about the audience being the board of directors for your company. Imagine you're giving feedback to an organization, and you say, all right, guys, here's all the things you're doing bad. Here's the things you're doing good. And you list out like 10 things. The CEO is going to glaze over because you're giving them too much information. They want to have something that's a clear takeaway message. If you think about presidential campaigns, they're very effective at that. Think about when Trump ran in 2016. Some of his messages were lock her up, build a wall. So very simple snippets that send a clear message, whether you love it or hate it. Like, we know what he stands for. The same should be true for your presentation to these organizations. They want to know, like, what's the most important thing here. All right, so key points. Do not just restate what the paper said. Say, all right, there are 3 strengths, X, Y, Z. There are 3 weaknesses. You got to synthesize information. This is probably the most challenging section. To synthesize well is to integrate the ideas across the paper and to tell a story about, overall, is this company doing well, or are they doing poorly? And here's our key takeaway message for the CEO. Cool. And I'll just show you that as well. So if we go back to our conclusion, conclusion, if you want to get 100%, you have to have a synthesis. This might be a little small for you to read, huh? And you also have to have a clear take-home message. So I would really encourage y'all to look at the rubric again, specifically for your section, as you're finishing it up. You might also want to swap sections with people. It's like, I did the strength, but Mike, I'll send you my strength. I'll look at your weakness section, and we'll make sure that we check off those check boxes. All right, one last thing. 2 of the 4 already have cited previously published SWOT analyses, and you can't do that. The goal of this is for you to do your own research on the organizations, come up with your own strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is essentially plagiarizing because you're just stealing someone else's work and presenting it as your own. So you cannot cite or reference other SWOT analyses. All right. So I posted these. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Very good question. Remember that strengths and weaknesses are internal things that they are currently doing as an organization. So a weakness might be, I treat my employees crappy. That's something I'm doing very poorly. A threat and an opportunity are external things that I'm not taking advantage of. So a good external factor that's a threat is like unpredictability in supply chain, or changing trends in the demographics of my population. Think about internal versus external first. Also, refer back to here because there is this will help you a lot. So what is a weakness? What are we not doing well? What is a threat? What are external factors that can hinder our competitive advantage if we don't prepare for it? I think probably the most confusion occurs for the opportunity section, and threats probably second most. We tend to put strengths as opportunities. So for example, if I have Honda and I say, Honda needs to get better at AI and self-driving cars, that's not an opportunity because it's something they're already doing. Imagine you're talking to Honda's board of directors and you say, all right, guys, I have this great opportunity for you. Keep doing what you're doing and do more of it. Like, they're going to say like, oh, what are we paying this guy for? They want to hear something that they haven't thought of, some kind of external factor that they can take advantage of and turn into an advantage. Does that make sense? If you're not sure, let me know and I'll help you identify which what it's classified as. All right. Any other questions on the paper? Yeah, no worries.
Throughout the year 2022. Okay.
If you're saying they're raising prices and as a result of that, they're losing customers, then that would be a weakness. Like because y'all are raising prices, you're losing out on business. Yeah, that's like something they're doing that's not working well. You could, if you want to reframe it, you could say, you said it's a result of the pandemic. You say like, oh, this pandemic presents a threat that they weren't prepared for. And we can see that they weren't prepared because they have to raise costs and that's losing customers. Sometimes just the way you phrase it can make it.
What's the one for that?
Yeah. If you need more clarification, you can send me an email. All right. I don't think we're gonna have time for, some of y'all are ready for attendance already. I don't think we have time for the self-assessment. So don't forget to do that in your own time. Don't forget to do the self-assessment. I'll put up the attendance slide and we'll get out of here. There it is. All right. Have a good weekend. I'll see y'all on Tuesday. All right, bye y'all. Why don't you shoot me an email because the first few weeks there were some issues with syncing. Yeah, I'll update that for you. Just send me an email so I don't forget. Cyrus. Oh, yeah, no problem. Nice job.